Welcome back. So in the last video, we introduced a lot of the fundamental concepts we're going to be seeing this quarter. The idea of what Linux is, the basics of a command line, how you can type things to it, and it prints things back, and the idea of navigating around a file system. In this video, I'm going to show you a few more advanced features to all the commands we learned in the last video: ls, pwd, cd. And these advanced features I'm going to show you are actually not just specific to those three commands, but actually a very fundamental part of kind of the mental model you need when thinking about these command line programs. Unlike the last video, this video and pretty much every other one from now on, I'm going to be running on Auto, so that it's a system very similar to what you will interact with. So remember, one of the ways that you can access one of the CSE versions of Linux that we have running is you can use the SSH command, and you can type your username. I'm going to type hschaefer, and it's and then @ and it's not quite like your email where you just say cs.washington.edu. We're going to say the name of the computer we want, and in this case, it's auto.cs.washington.edu. So I'm trying to go to the auto computer that CSE owns, and again, like I said in the last video, you're going to be prompted for your password. You can type this in. It's very safe to do that. But I have a fancy little setup that remembers my password, so I don't have to type it in. But so now I'm in Auto, and you can see these are all my files I have on the CSE computer. It's kind of a mess in my home directory, so let's go to CSE 391. I have a folder in there called CSE 391. Let's ls to see what's inside there. Oh, there's a lecture 1 folder. Let's go inside lecture 1 and ls inside there. And it's actually the same files I had before. On my Mac, I just uploaded them to Auto so that I could do my demo here. So when you use programs like ls, you type in these commands, it turns out that they actually let you customize kind of what you want them to do by having you pass in what we call flags and arguments. This is not like super common terminology. Everyone has different terms for these. In this class, we call these things flags and arguments. So let me show you what this looks like. So let me just show, I'll first type the command and then I'll explain what it does. ls-l. So notice before I just typed in plain ls, it just printed out the names of the files. That was great. Then I type in ls-l, and it prints all of this extra information. -l is a flag that I passed in to say, hey, ls, please print in long form. L stands for long form for the ls program. And long form for ls means print out like the date it was modified, its size in bytes, who owns it, a bunch of other information. We'll actually talk about what these other things mean. Now, there are actually lots of flags you can pass into the ls program. I'll talk about how you can figure out what those are later. But ls-l is a very common command that you'll use to print out more information about the files. So flags are things that you pass in with this like a dash. So when you say -l, you're passing in like the L flag to say long form. ls also takes what we call in 391 arguments. And so instead of passing in a flag, another thing you could do is say, hey, ls dir1. And here you're passing in dir1 as an argument. And when ls is given an argument, it's going to try to list that directory. So I passed in dir1. It says, oh, you probably want me to list that one instead of the current directory. So that's why it prints out cats and dogs. That's effectively the same as saying cd dir1 and then ls, the current directory. So you can take arguments. And it turns out you could definitely pass in both flags and arguments. So ls-l dir1 prints out in long form all of the content, all of the files inside dir1. Okay. Now, let me show you one other flag that you sometimes can find helpful. You can pass in multiple flags. Notice this Among Us picture is 7,709 bytes. And if you're like me, have no concept of how big that file is. I don't know how to convert bytes into something normal like kilobytes or megabytes just in my head. So one useful flag is the H flag for human readable. And so it's 7.6 kilobytes, which is just a little bit more useful for you to look at than seeing 7,000 bytes. So ls-l is dash long form, ls-lh is long form human readable. It turns out that these things are actually separate flags that you could pass in separately. ls-l-h, passing in the L flag and the H flag. But by convention, usually when you pass in multiple flags, you just kind of stick them all in after one dash together. An order of these flags generally doesn't matter. Sometimes it does, but you'll just run into errors when it does matter. So you can usually assume it doesn't matter by default. So HL would do the same thing. And again, I already mentioned you could pass in both flags and arguments if you want to. Okay? So now you might be wondering, okay, Hunter, how the heck did you know this dash L thing, this dash H thing? Like, is there just this magic flag that helps me solve my problem? Usually, sometimes yes, not always, but there is a definite way to figure that out. So Linux, one of the things they designed and Unix, one of the things they kind of really thought was core to what they should provide is documentation. So the operating system should help the user surface documentation about how to use its commands. So for any built-in command in Linux or Unix, you can type man and then the name of the command. Man in this context has nothing to do with men. We have way more than we need in CS already. Man is short for manual. Man ls. It's not the best name. I definitely understand that. If you type in man ls, it's saying, hey, call the manual program and pass it ls, and it gives you instructions about ls. You can scroll around with this with arrow keys. There are lots and lots of flags you can pass in. Most of them, I have no idea what they do. I am not usually the type to try to devote brain cells. I use devote there instead of waste because I was trying to be nice. To memorizing all of the possible things you can do, because the man page just exists for you to look up. So for some super common ones like dash L and dash H, you tend to just memorize those because you use them so frequently. But for most of these, I have no idea what they do, but the man page tells me exactly that. So one of the ones I actually want to show you is this one up here, dash A. Dash A tends to be really helpful when we think about these things called hidden files. Before I talk about what a hidden file is, notice at the very bottom of this man page, like at the bottom of the screen, it gives you a little bit of help to how to use this program that lets you like scroll around through text. We'll talk a little bit more about this program, but it says press Q to quit, so I'm going to press Q to quit, and that takes me out of it. So great. So let me go into dir1, and I'm going to do ls, and I see my directories in here. And I saw on that man page, there is this thing for dash A, and it says show hidden files. And you're like, well, this directory only has 2 files in it. What could possibly be hidden in there? And so you press ls-a, and it prints out 2 other things, dot and dot dot, as well as the 2 files that were there before. Dot is a special file that refers to the current directory, whichever one you're in right now. Dot dot, the 2 dots, refers to the parent directory, the directory above you. These are hidden in Unix. Whenever a file starts with a dot, it's considered a hidden file. And so by default, it's not shown unless you use the dash A command or the dash A flag. So these are just handy dandy resources for you to help you navigate around the file system. So you might have been wondering when I said I went into dir1, how do I ever get out? That's what cd ... is for. You're referring to this special file ... in this directory that refers to the parent. So when you say cd ... it takes you back up. And so you can see when you look at the paths. So let me go back into dir1, do pwd. I'm in homes, IWS, H Schaefer. That's my home directory. So that's when I originally logged in. That's where it sticks me because that's home for me. And then I cd'd into 391, lecture 1, dir1. And then when I say cd ... and then pwd, it now shows me I'm outside of dir1 back in lecture 1. You might be wondering, what does cd dot do? Well, it just takes you to the directory you're in right now. So you might be wondering, well, what's the point of dot? We'll actually see some uses of the dot directory later when you're thinking about moving and copying files around. Okay, so that was a lot of things. Flags, arguments, these hidden files that exist on your computer that you can see with ls-a, and notice you can combine a with any of those other flags I showed you before. Now I want us to go and switch to a practice problem to kind of get you to test what you're seeing so far. So assume you're kind of where we were in my directory right now in this lecture 1, and you want to list all of the files in dir1, including hidden files, such that you get the long form information in human readable format. And most definitely, you probably don't remember all the things I just showed you, so you probably want to pull up the man page in your terminal when trying this. And just to help you out, I include a little picture here of what this might look like. So the video is going to go ahead and pause and give you some time to type in your answer. Okay, so hopefully you were able to type something in and see what was going to happen here. I wanted, before I just show you what the final answer is and explain what you saw on item pool, I want to explain a little bit of thought process here. So this is asking you to do something fairly complex. There's a lot of things going on here. Usually what helps me is to try to break a problem down into smaller parts. And so thinking about, well, what's the most basic version of this task? Just list all the files in dir1 from where I am right now. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. ls, remember ls on its own lists the files in the current directory. If I want to list files in a different directory, I can specify its name right here, ls dir1. Okay, so that got me all the files in dir1, except it's missing any hidden files that might have been there. And so we just were introduced with, hey, if you want to print hidden files, you need to pass in that a flag. So a is for all files. So I'm going to say ls-a dir1. And then you might scratch your head and you're like, okay, so it also said long form and human readable. And, I don't have the best memory. I don't remember what I said a few minutes ago about how you print things in human readable form. And so this is where man pages will always be your friend. Whenever you want to look something up, these man pages could be your go-to resource for learning about how to use any command. Part of the reason why we introduce you with these concepts early on is so that you kind of actually know where to look and what to search for. So when I pull up this man page, I told you it's very long, there's lots of things. One thing that's a little less obvious from this screen, and I wish they actually showed you how to do this without hiding it, is the ability to search. It'd be really nice if you could just search for human readable. So to search for things, you press the /. / puts you in this little typing mode. You can see I have a cursor now at the bottom. And if I type in human and then enter, it shows me the next occurrence of the word human readable. And so sometimes when you have an idea like, oh, I think I want to do this human readable thing, usually you try searching that or some synonyms for those things and see if there's something that kind of sparks your memory. And you look, hey, there's this -h flag. So I'm going to press Q to quit out of that man page. And then remember, I wanted ls-a, and then, I also wanted that h flag, and then dir1. And if you look back at the problem, it also said to include long form format. So I'm going to include ls-lah dir1. And you probably saw, if you were able to solve this on item pool, that we accept that any permutation of ls-lha or hal or al, all of those are the same, changing those flags. I realized when I was testing this out on my own, it turns out that you're actually allowed to put the flags after the arguments. This works on Atu. This isn't guaranteed to work on all Unix operating systems, so be a little careful. Almost always, by convention, people put flags first and then arguments, but it kind of depends on which program you're actually trying to run there. Okay? So that's how you go ahead and solve those types of problems. So I always recommend, as kind of a meta strategy, is start simple and build your way up and use man pages and search for things. Okay. So now I just have a few more kind of miscellaneous topics I want to go through. So looking back at the man page for LS, one thing that's really helpful, so I showed you down below, there's lots and lots of descriptions for all the flags and arguments you can possibly pass. One thing that's really helpful is actually the top of the page. So it tells you the name of the program. LS means list directory contents. So that usually gives you a good sign of what it's supposed to do. And then the synopsis actually kind of shows you how to use it. So it says type the LS program, then options, and the man pages, when they say option, they mean flags, ... and then file ... Whenever you see these ... in man pages, it usually means pass in 0 or more of these things. So when it's saying option ... it's actually telling you in that synopsis that you can pass in more than one flag. Similarly, it's telling you in the syntax that it's able to take more than one file to pass in. And so if you want to, you can say ls dir1 and dir2. Passing in both of those things tells it to list out both of those directories, which is pretty handy. Okay, so that's one thing. Man pages kind of give you a really good indication of how to at least start using a different command. Another one is chaining paths. That's another very useful tip, or another useful trick. So say I'm back in my home directory, and notice one of the very common abbreviations for home directory is this tilde. So when you see tilde, you should think home. Like, think of it as like a really small squiggly house. Maybe like the only house you could probably afford in like San Francisco or New York, or maybe now Seattle. So there is my home directory. If you want to CD, instead of just CDing one directory at a time, you can always go and specify a full path. So a series of directories separated by slashes. And if you pass in this path, it's going to say, oh, you want to go from here to CSE 391 to lecture 1 to dir1. I'll just move you there in one CD. This is also really useful when you think about going up directories. Just like you can chain a path going down, you could chain a path of ... going up. So you say, go to the ... directory, which is the one above me, and then go to its ... directory, the one above it, and then go to its ... directory, the one above it, and that took me back home. And if you see, if I go up one more, this takes me to a list of all the CSE usernames in this folder right now. So I'm gonna go back home. Sorry, I'm gonna go back to, well, I guess I made one step ahead. Wherever you are, anywhere in a Linux system, oh, whoops, CSE 391. I was trying to tab complete there, press tab, and it sometimes will kind of autocomplete what you're typing. Wherever you might be in a Linux system, you can always type cd tilde, and that will take you to your home directory, because tilde means home. That always takes you home. Another common way of doing this is just typing cd with no arguments. If you type cd with no arguments, it also takes you home. But it's important to know tilde means home, because you actually use that pretty frequently in different commands. Okay, whirlwind of things. I only have one more thing I have to show you today, which is going to be a very slow process to learn, but a good one to start early and get used to how uncomfortable it feels from the beginning so that you get better at it over time. Let me go back to CSE 391, back to lecture 1 and dir1. Let's edit this file for dogs. So this dogs file says something about like, I love dogs. And what if I wanted to change it to like, say, I really love dogs? Well, you might think of like, oh, well, if I ever wanted to add a file on my computer, well, if it was like a Java file, I might like open it up in JGrasp or in Eclipse or IntelliJ or whatever your favorite IDE is. If it was like a Word document, you'd open up in Word. But how could I possibly like edit a file in the command line? And it turns out that people actually written programs to act as editors in the command line. We recommend one of two options. The two most popular, one is called Vim, and the other one is called Emacs. They're just different programs written by different authors that are meant to edit files. They operate in very different ways. They've made very different design decisions of how they work. A lot of people feel very strongly about one versus the other. You commonly see lots of arguments about which one's better. I think that's a whole waste of time. You just choose which one of them, and you might like it more. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's just a bunch of text on a screen. We provide documentation for both of them. So on our course website, we have documentation for both Vim and Emacs. In 391 this quarter, I almost exclusively use this one called Vim. It's just the one I like more. I got used to it first. So in lectures, I'll always be using that. So I probably would recommend that one just so it's similar to what I'm doing. But we provide documentation for both. If you like Emacs, go to town. You can like Emacs. Let me show you real quick what this looks like. If I type vim dogs.txt, so Vim is the command line program, dogs is the argument, it opens up an editor that I can actually edit in. And Vim is a bit weird at first. It's what we call a modal editor. It has modes. And so you start off in what we call normal mode, where you don't actually, by typing things, doesn't actually type things, you're like typing special commands. But you type the I key to go into insert mode, and notice the bottom left just said I'm in insert mode. And now whenever you type any keys, you're actually really doing typing. So I'm going to type really, or I really love dogs. And then to get back into that normal mode, you press escape. And then now when you move around with arrow keys, it moves with arrow keys. If you type L, it doesn't type the character L because you're not in insert mode. And then the only other thing you really need to know at this point about how to use Vim is how to save and quit. Kind of funnily, if you look at Stack Overflow, one of the most upvoted questions is, how do I exit Vim? It's very simple, but it is not intuitive. I'll give you that. So in normal mode, you type colon, and then you type Q. But since we made a change, I want to save first. So I'm going to type W for write, and then colon Q for quit. All of our documentation will show you this. We will be constantly using Vim in this class. So you'll see this over and over again. So don't worry if it's like kind of intimidating right now. I guarantee you for the next 4 or 5 weeks, you will be so tremendously slow using Vim or Emacs, whichever one you choose, if you haven't used them before. But I promise you that investment in trying to learn these tools, forcing yourself to learn these tools, is going to be so useful and pay off later. Because these tools are really, really flexible and let you do kind of real crazy things when you're editing files. We probably won't get into doing a lot of those super advanced things, but it will be definitely laying that groundwork for later on. So that is everything that I have for today. We did ls, pwd, cd. We learned about hidden files, flags, arguments. I showed you a lot of other random things like the home directory, moving up and down and paths. And I showed you these command line editors. And these are tools that are going to be the building blocks for a lot of the more advanced tools that we'll use in future weeks. So hopefully I'll see you all in class on Tuesday, where we can actually get a chance to talk about some of these things. And I can probably answer a lot of the questions you have. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, you definitely post them on the message board. But I do think that having that live chance for us to talk to each other is going to be really helpful in exploring these ideas.